So the UFC just had their pre-fight press conferences for the UFC Fight Night this weekend in Vegas, and I wanted to take a look at the main fighters on the card because I sat back, I listened to all of their fighter interviews, and there was some really nice things to take away from all the fighters. So I'm going to go through all of them, not every single fighter that sat down, because quite frankly, there were a few of them that were just a couple minutes long, and it wasn't really worth diving into. But we have all of the main fighters, and I'm going to kind of recap my thoughts for you, after watching them sit down, seeing where their headspace is at, seeing if they're having trouble with the weight cut or anything along those lines. We're going to get into it in just a second. Before we do, though, I do want to say hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with too many YouTube channels. Let's get into it. So I'll start with Dan Ige. Dan Ige is in very good spirits. He was talking about his opponent, Bryce Mitchell, and he was being very respectful. It's one of the reasons why I love Dan Ige, and he started talking about him playing video games with his dad, and another reason why he's really good. So something that he wasn't really talking anything was shocking and new that he was doing, you know what I mean? But the only thing that I thought was interesting that he did mention is he mentioned that his wife was pregnant, and last time his wife was pregnant, he ended up getting a knockout because there's a new motivation for him. He's bringing a new kid to the world and he needs to take care of his wife. And honestly, I can very well see that. I can see Dan Ige going in there and he's like, okay, I'm having another kid. I need a 50K bonus, and then going in there and starching Bryce Mitchell. That wouldn't shock me, especially something like that would be such a motivator to get in there and do whatever you can. But the only other thing that I found very interesting, but I don't really know what to take away from it, because it's not necessarily oh, Dan Ige said this means this is going to happen at the UFC Fight Night. He was being really respectful talking about Bryce Mitchell, and he said that he doesn't want to pedestal his opponents, but at the same time, he can't underestimate them. So it's kind of just giving you an idea of where his headspace is at. So I don't know, man, I don't know if that's going to really have anything to do with the fight week, but Dan Ige, he seems in good spirits. He seems ready for the fight. Weight cut looks good so far. Can't wait to see him. But speaking of people in good spirits, Marina Rodriguez was also in very good spirits, and she was very critical of herself, and especially with her last performance. She said that she has corrected the mistakes in her last fight, and she has also taken care of herself technically, and she is bigger, she is stronger, she has improved both her body, physicality, and her mind. So she is coming into this fight with a very good headspace, and she's also still has her eyes on the title. It's not just sometimes you see okay, I'm just gonna sit here and I'm just gonna focus on my opponent, whatever happens. No, she's coming into this fight wanting to make a statement and wanting to prove that she still belongs in the division and wants to get to the title. And she particularly worded it to say that she wants the chance again. She just wants the chance. So after seeing what she had to say at the press conference, I am just even more of a believer in Marina Rodriguez to win this fight. But talking about somebody who I don't believe in, of course, is Michelle Waterson. So I don't know how else to say this besides she's a little delusional. She still thinks she can compete with the top of the division. She spent a lot of time in the whole press conference talking about judging, but the only really big takeaway from it was she thinks she can win this fight, which she can't. I don't understand why anybody would be picking her. So the only thing that really stood out to me is she was saying that she's a gladiator in there and she can go forever, and no matter what, she has that Nate Diaz effect where if it was just her and another person in a street fight, she would win no matter what. In particular, she mentioned Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She said if her and Joanna were having an endless fight, she would destroy Joanna because she's a gladiator. That's nuts. Joanna would have stolen her life there. That wouldn't even have been close fight. So I don't know what she's thinking. I don't know if it's fake, but she's going to get stomped by Marina Rodriguez, though. What can you do? At least she's in good spirits, I guess. Speaking of which, it kind of reminds me, everybody's been in pretty good spirits, though, because moving on to Bryan Battle, he spent a lot of time talking about how happy he was being in the UFC, how great of an opportunity this was. He wants to be active. He wants to make his money while he's young. The weight cuts being easier. He's very happy with his last fight. He has a good team. He was being really positive all around. That's something you love to see from a guy like Bryan Battle, someone on the come up, right? He was talking about all the mentors that he has. He was being very respectful to the people around him, particularly guys like Alexander Volkanovski, which is really cool to see. But something that I really did want to take away from this is he mentioned how much he learned from his Renat Fakhretdinov loss, and he wants to prove in a rematch that he's improved from that. Having a loss like that, it just made him elevate his game, and it is amazing when fighters do that. And looking at the way he bounced back from that, and of course, we haven't necessarily seen enough, but it looks like he's really been working. He's been really he looks like he's in good shape. The weight cut's been getting easier on him, I really like Bryan Battle. I really like the way he's handling his career so far, and he was being super respectful to Rinat Fakhretdinov, which you don't see too often, where he's like, he of course I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of like, I wish he was a little bit of a D-bag because that way I could get like more motivated and call out for a rematch and really knock him out. But he's like, no, he beat me. He's a great fighter. And I took a lot of lessons from that loss. So that's really cool to see from Bryan Battle. I have a feeling this dude's going to be really successful in the UFC. Now, for his opponent, AJ Fletcher, was a very, very quick presser, but I did want to touch on it because I was just touching on Bryan Battle. The only thing that we really took from it is he's now training at elevation. That could mean something, probably. He didn't seem to like really say that really elevated his game at all, but of course, like, hey, training at elevation would definitely do something for your career, right? But again, it was very quick. We don't know exactly what's going to come from that. Maybe his cardio will be better, probably it will, but who knows. Then we move on to Ricardo Ramos, and it was also a little bit of a quick presser, and he pretty much just summed up that he just really wants to win this fight. He didn't really go too in depth with something, and the only thing that I did like, which confused me a little bit, because he said something that was really cool, and even the people asking him questions really picked up on it, because he said if he doesn't really look at anything as a loss as long as he learns from that. He's like, if you're learning from your losses, then you never actually lose. But then everybody and all the reporters started talking about how he should have pulled out from his last fight, and that means, I guess, was he making excuses? I haven't really followed Ricardo Ramos in that sense, so it's just a little bit confusing, because it's like such a good outlook to have, where it's like, hey, I learned from my mistake. I learned from my losses. I learned from everything bad that happened to me in the UFC. But then people are asking him like, oh, you said you should have pulled out of that fight. So I don't know what to make of that. I really don't. It's a good outlook to have, but maybe it's going to come with some asterisks. I'm not sure. Now, someone I do want to talk about is Charles Jourdain. Charles Jourdain is having a very brand new outlook to this. He is no longer fighting for the fans. He said in his words, he wants to be selfish since everybody, and you know what? I understand it. I understand it, because he was like, he came into the UFC, he was fighting wild, he was putting on a show for the fans, right? And then everybody was like, yeah, Charles Jourdain, let's go. I love Charles Jourdain. But then, to use his words, he said one loss and all the fans start spitting in your face. So he's very salty with the fans, and understandably so. I totally get it. He's bouncing off a win, and now people like Charles Jourdain again. You know, like I understand why that would be so frustrating. So now he's just focusing on being a better fighter and being himself. And you saw the game plan implemented in his last fight against Kron Gracie. He wasn't fighting wild. He was sticking to the game plan, and he looked quite good. So now he is not just focusing on pleasing the fans. He's focusing on becoming a better fighter. I completely understand that mindset. I respect from it. I have a lot of respect for it. And he just said that he's taking one fight at a time. He's particularly focusing on this fight in front of him because he now has a fiance and he really wants to support her. So that, again, like I was talking about earlier, that could be like such a big motivation for you to come out there and get a really, really great knockout. And then another thing that I really loved that he had to say was he was talking about his losses, because of course he's had his ups and downs in his career. He hates when people play the blame game, because he mentioned, of course, again, I'm paraphrasing, I don't know exactly what he said off the top of my head, but he said that men grow when they face challenges and hardships and they face them head on. And that's what he did with losses. He worked on them and got better. And he hates when people are just like, oh, well, I was injured. I just didn't feel good in there. You know what I mean? No, he's like, okay, I lost because of this happened. I couldn't get over like this right hand that this guy kept countering with me with. Let's work on it. That's what I love about him. Charles Jourdain is a very, very respectable fighter. Moving on to Mateusz Gamrot, though. So we didn't get too much from him, besides that we figured out that he is training in Florida now, and he's training with the Polish national wrestling team for this fight. And according to him, he's improved his striking massively. He's looking forward to the fight. There was a lot of like translation issues. People were talking about like, hey, Mateusz, you got eye surgery. Is it going to be a new mythical fighter? And then he of course, I'm not blaming him or anything, but he didn't understand the question. It was just like, yeah, I'm fighting Rafael Fiziev. So we didn't get a lot from that press conference, but hey, if we see Gamrot with improved striking, even just a little bit, this dude is already dangerous. He's being underestimated in this fight. If he comes out there, could you imagine if he starches Rafael Fiziev? Could you imagine? That would be wild. I think this dude is being massively underrated. I thought his striking was okay. And if he turns that okay into an excellent, he's going to be a horrible problem for the division. Now, guys, let's move on to Bryce Mitchell. I love Bryce Mitchell. Big fan of Bryce Mitchell. He was just sitting down and being so grateful that he is finally happy, healthy, and getting through everything. He has the goal to make history in the UFC. He wants to be the new UFC cash cow. Now, he typically, when fighters do this, okay, and I promise you, with all my heart, I'm not just saying this because I am a Bryce Mitchell fan. I would be very critical of a guy like Ciryl Gane, for example. And, I didn't talk about that in this video. I just made a video criticizing Ciryl Gane. I'm a big fan of Ciryl Gane, okay? So, I understand how this could come out, but Bryce Mitchell was talking about the Ilia Topuria fight and how, like, again, he was being thankful that he is, like, in there. He's healthy. He's finally ready. And he was talking about how he shouldn't have taken that fight against Ilia Topuria because he was so sick, so injured. He should not have been in there. He let his pride get in the way, and he lied to his coaches to get into that fight, and then it didn't work out for him. I believe him. I don't know why. I just do. He seems so real, and everything from we've seen from Bryce Mitchell so far, he doesn't seem like the type of guy to really make excuses. Could it be? Yeah, we've seen UFC fighters do that all the time, but I wholeheartedly believe this guy. This guy seems to wear his heart on his chest, and that's why I'm a big fan of him. He just speaks his mind. He's real. He is not fake like we see so many of these fighters, right? So I wholeheartedly believe him. That doesn't mean I think he would have beat Ilia Topuria. I think he would have got smashed either way, but I really, really like that. And the other thing is that really stood out to me was the reason that Bryce Mitchell fights so hard is because he mentioned that, and I love when fighters are grateful of Dana White in the UFC, man, and Bryce Mitchell was just doing that. He was like happy to be there. He said that he'll never be able to get another job with the person that he is. So he is literally fighting for his life. That is true. He's fighting for his livelihood. If that's not motivation, I don't know what is. The way Mitchell sat down, he was so happy, so content, so thankful to be there, and then was talking about like fighting for his livelihood. He needs to do this. I was picking Ige, but just that press conference alone, I might pick Bryce Mitchell. Regardless, I hope he wins. I'm a big, big fan of that guy. And lastly, the last person coming through the press conference was Rafael Fiziev. Now, we also didn't get a lot of information from him because he started off with a pretty good joke because he's like, oh, after that loss, I learned how to cook pretty well. I can make a pretty good humble pie. So, like, of course, because he finally got humbled with Justin Gaethje. And I actually laughed at that. That was pretty good. But other than that, he didn't say much besides, like, I'm ready for the fight. I need to stick to the game plan. And I one day want to go for the title. Like, that's pretty much all we got from Rafael Fiziev. But regardless, he seems healthy. He's looking good, man. He's looking powerful. He's looking scary. So, man, that's going to be such a good fight to watch. But with that, guys, that is a sum up of the UFC press conference. And it's like kind of like analyzing where every fighter's at. I'd love to know if there's any particular part from these press conferences that you have taken that I haven't mentioned. Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear about it. And thank you so much for watching this video. On the screen right now, you'll have 2 videos from the Clenbat channel. If you would like to continue watching the channel, I will see you either there or in the next video, guys. Take care.